Today we're going to take a look at the consolidation of power under the kingdoms of England, France, and Spain. I want to take a moment though and discuss what's going on in the rest of Europe. In the areas of Russia, the Russian crown is going to be consolidated around the city of Moscow or Muscovy, and that empire will continue to grow all the way into the 19th century. In Italy, there'll be a series of small principalities and city-states. These will be divided all the way into the 19th century. And then finally, in the areas today of Austria and Germany, we have the Holy Roman Empire, which is not holy nor Roman nor really an empire. In Italy and the Holy Roman Empire, there is no strong central power. And that's what feudalism is. In Western Europe, we'll see the end of feudalism, in which kings themselves will consolidate power and there'll be a strong central authority. And so, what we see in this reconstruction of the French and English monarchies and the growth of the Spanish monarchies is this growth of monarchy and a decline of nobility. We're going to see post-feudal wars. These post-feudal wars are expensive. These kings and queens are employing mercenary armies, and these armies have to be paid, otherwise they rebel. Towns are going to grow wealthier because trading routes will be set back up again, roads will be protected, and because of that, we see this growing strength of trade through towns. Kings will appoint civil servants, corregidors, justices of the peace, bailiffs, all these things to help carry out their will, which ultimately, centuries later, will become the national will and will become much more centralized. And ultimately, one of the key pieces here is that kings will control the taxes. They'll take the taxation away from the nobility and they'll bring it back to themselves. And so that's going to be really important as we're looking at what's happening in Western Europe. So to begin our story, we'll start with the Kingdom of England. Now, England had just finished the Hundred Years' War, okay, back in 1453. And really, out of the frying pan into the fire, because the War of the Roses, as it's known, will be in 1455, start in 1455, and continue until 1485. And it really is a fight over dynastic claims to the throne. And to look at the story and why it gets its name, War of the Roses, is because it's between the descendants of the sons of Edward III. These were the Duke of York and the Duke of Lancaster. Their surname was Plantagenet. At the end of the War of the Roses, the Plantagenet line will be destroyed. It'll no longer be the family of the French, or of the English. So if we go back and kind of rewind a little bit to where this, problem starts at, it actually begins in 1399 with Henry of Bolingbroke. Henry was a son of the Duke of Lancaster. He deposed and murdered the English king Richard II. Richard II was a grandson and the rightful heir of Edward III. So what happens is this places the House of Lancaster, who were heirs of Edward III's fourth son, known as John the Gaunt, onto the throne of England, even though there were descendants better suited by birth rank to be king. Henry of Bolingbroke took the name Henry IV, and this is the Henry IV that we talked about back in the Hundred Years' War. Henry IV died in 1413. His son and successor, Henry V, was a great soldier, and his military successes against France in the Hundred Years' War bolstered his enormous popularity, enabling him to strengthen the Lancastrian hold on the throne. But Henry V died unexpectedly in 1422, and the Lancastrian king Henry VI of England ascended the throne as an infant. He was only 9 months old when he became king. In 1453, at the age of 31, Henry suffered the first of several bouts of mental illness, which he failed even to recognize his newborn son, Edward of Westminster. And so, because of this, Henry was a weak king. And because he was a weak king, that enabled other nobles and other family members to vie for power in the kingdom. And so, in 1461, in open war, his army was defeated by Edward the York's army. Now, Edward imprisoned Henry VI in the Tower of London. Okay, so he didn't kill Edward, or didn't kill Henry. He just imprisoned him. And then Edward began solidifying his kingship, and England remained at peace until 1469. Henry actually just dies in 1471. After Edward dies, and at the custom of the time, Edward the Fourth placed his two younger brothers, George, Duke of Clarence, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, in the household of his cousin Warwick for tutoring and training. Edward the Fourth was known as a well-loved and excellent ruler, but he reopens the dynastic struggle by marrying a commoner, the widow of a Lancastrian knight, and her name was Elizabeth Woodinville, or Woodvilles. The Woodvilles were a large and ambitious family, and Elizabeth managed to improve their positions through her marriage. This created havoc among the old nobility and caused fierce resentment on the part of Warwick, who felt that Edward the Fourth had played him as a fool. When Edward the Fourth died unexpectedly in April of 1483, his younger brother Richard was appointed by the king as in his will as his sole protector. So he was supposed to protect the realm and the heir, Edward the Fifth, until Edward was of age to um, rule the kingdom. Sometime within the next few weeks, though, the fact of Edward the First or Fourth's bigamous marriage to Elizabeth Woodville became known, and the young heir, Edward the Fifth, was declared illegitimate and was set aside in favor of his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who becomes Richard the Third. This was done openly through the council and parliamentary action. The legal document detailing the facts was clear and concise in excluding Edward the Fifth and his brother because their father had been betrothed to somebody else, Eleanor Butler. So Richard, Duke of Gloucester, becomes King of England legally and by birthright and by parliamentary act. And this is where the question emerges: is what happened to those boys, the nephews of Richard III? Nobody really knows. I mean, they just disappear from history. But that's kind of a side note because Richard himself, okay, is actually defeated at the Battle of Bosworth Field. And so this ends the War of the Roses. And it ends in 1485 when the forces of the only Lancastrian claimant, Henry VII, whose last name was Tudor, defeats Richard III. Okay, Henry won only because his stepfather, Thomas Lord Stanley, and Stanley's brother William turned against Richard in the last moments of the confrontation, as Richard III himself was within striking distance of Tudor. Tudor's claim to the English throne, though, was extremely vague. He traced his birthright through his mother Margaret Beaufort, a descendant of the illicit line of John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford that had been barred from the crown by parliamentary act. So he wasn't really even had a legitimate claim to the throne. Henry also had Edward IV's marriage reinstated, so that later on his marriage to Elizabeth, okay, would further reinforce his claim to the throne. So that's why he did that. And there she is. There are good arguments that either Richard III killed his nephews or that Henry VII did. Both had opportunity and strong reason for doing so. It's interesting to note, however, that there are at least 10 heirs with better crown rights than Tudor who were alive and living, free of any restraint under Richard III. And so Richard III did not eliminate people who could come to power or claim a better claim control of the crown. But after Richard III died and Henry Tudor became king, all of those claimants of the throne were eliminated, okay, within a few years of Tudor taking control of the country. So the question as to, you know, what happened to the boys, and who's in charge, not who's in charge of England, but what happened to the boys and who killed the boys, is still up for debate. Most people think it was Richard III that killed them, but there's actually a society out that has been trying for generations of clearing Richard's name. As a matter of fact, earlier in 2013, they actually located Richard III's body under a parking lot. So So the War of the Roses is ended under Henry Tudor. The Tudor dynasty, as it was called, though, only lasts for 3 generations. And so, what does Henry Tudor or Henry VII do? As I said here, he's a very adept king. He brought being a powerful king back. Um, he focused on marrying his children off to other kings of state or leaders of countries. So Margaret to James IV of Scotland, his sons Arthur, and then Henry to Catherine of Aragon, who's a daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. This will create problems, which we'll get to when we take a look at the Reformation. He also brought in the Star Chamber. He actually brought it back. And this was really a way of him to impose his political will upon the nobility. And so under Henry Tudor, the power of the nobility is lessened, and the King of England and Wales becomes more and more definite.